I remember having dinner with some colleagues when a guest at the table interrupted our conversation with a question. Are you guys talking about people or gorillas? Not something that most people get asked, but since I am a primatologist, it was very appropriate. And we were actually talking about gorillas. The fact that this wasn't evident goes to why I have dedicated nearly 30 years of my career to studying these amazing and majestic animals. They are so much like us. They share 98% of our DNA, and the familiar way that they look, act, and care for each other draws us in and reminds us of ourselves. The gorillas that I study high in the mountains of Rwanda are the very famous gorillas in the mist, the incredibly rare and furrier cousins of the lowland gorillas that you see at a zoo. Only 1,000 of them remain on the planet. They live in tight-knit groups led by a dominant male, females, and their absolutely adorable offspring. And when you're lucky enough to spend time watching their family dynamics, they too look familiar. Just like us, they spend a lot of time together enjoying a good meal. 10 years ago, the experiences of my family reinforced the similarities between gorillas and people in a profound and very personal way. When my daughters were just 2 and 8 months old, my husband called me at work after what we thought was a routine health procedure. Instead, the doctor told him he had esophageal cancer. Over the next few weeks, it went from a stage 2 to a stage 4B diagnosis. Ever the scientist, I spent time reviewing statistics and treatments while he focused on being present for our daughters and his own health and well-being as he struggled through chemotherapy. The research showed that people with his diagnosis had a 2.5% chance of surviving 5 years. We almost made it. In the aftermath of my husband's death and the years that have followed, my family of 3 has been so lucky to be surrounded by an incredible network of family and friends who strengthened their connections to us, supported us, and constantly reminded us that we were part of a community. They flew in for graduations and birthdays, included us in evening meals, and invited us to join them on holiday celebrations or vacations. A few weeks before my husband passed away, he mentioned wanting to build a treehouse for our daughters. Our community came together and not only built a treehouse, but built one of the bougiest tree houses you could ever expect to see. It had a skylight for watching the night stars and a trap door should ever a game require a quick escape. My daughters spent hours in this space together and with friends, creating magical worlds in one of the last physical gifts their dad ever gave them. I remember being so worried about what the impact would be of losing a parent at such a young age. But I was reassured to learn that strong social networks, like the ones we were lucky to have, are associated with a host of positive outcomes. In fact, in one of the most watched TED Talks ever, Dr. Robert Wallinger of Harvard University describes how the quality of our social relationships is a key predictor of our long-term health and happiness. And now, 10 years later, when I look at the amazing human beings that my daughters have become, I realize that our strong social safety net provided them with a critical buffer to navigate their grief and loss and to build a resiliency that I wouldn't have thought possible in the aftermath of their father's death. So you may be thinking, what does this actually have to do with gorillas? Well, it turns out a lot. Around the time of my husband's passing, coincidentally, the gorillas that we study in Rwanda started undergoing population changes that mirrored what my family was experiencing. Many young gorillas became motherless, which is an incredibly traumatic event for a young gorilla, as their bond with their mother is incredibly strong. Simply put, gorilla moms are amazing. Just like us, they are patient and nurturing, and just like us, they maintain relationships with their offspring well before they reach independence. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, I took photos like this one to the hospital with me, thinking that if I could be half as good a mom as a gorilla, then I would be doing a great job. And in fact, if a young gorilla loses its mother before it's weaned at roughly the age of 3, it will not survive. Now, we know from studies of other highly social animals like chimpanzees and elephants that if a youngster loses its mother even after weaning, it can have profound negative outcomes, the most significant being an early death. But amazingly, in our studies of gorilla families, we did not find this to be the case. Not only did motherless youngsters survive, but they often thrived. This is Titus. His father and brother were killed by poachers, and he lost his mother a month later, all before reaching 4 years of age. But despite these devastating losses, Titus went on to become a remarkable leader, using diplomacy to guide and protect his family for 2 decades. Titus's strength of character inspired many, and he's had a movie made about him and even a beer named after him. Titus is just one example of how gorillas show resiliency in the face of loss. And while we don't have all the answers, our ongoing studies suggest that a lot has to do with their support network. When a young gorilla loses its mother, the family quickly fills the gap in social companionship. We see a strengthening of relationships, and in fact, a newly orphaned gorilla will spend more time near other gorillas than it did before its mother died. And the dominant male takes this youngster under its wing. He provides protection, access to resources, and a safe and secure sleeping partner at night. And he does this regardless of whether he is the biological father. As the data came in, I realized that what we were seeing as scientists mirrored what my family had experienced and what I had experienced as a wife and a mother. That the social relationships that were so critical to our healing were operating in the same way in the gorillas and with the same life-changing effects. This is Fasha. By the age of 4, Fasha had lost both her mother and her father. One day, our teams watched as Fasha's family crossed a river. Everyone crossed but Fasha, perhaps because her foot was healing, because just a few weeks before, we had found her caught in a snare that had been set for antelope. The snare was wound very tightly around her ankle, and it took weeks to heal. So when her family crossed this river, Fasha held back. But then something remarkable happened. Fasha's sister waited for her on the other side of the river. She held out her hand in encouragement. And then when Fasha made it safely across, the two embraced in an enormous hug. And just a few feet away, the rest of Fasha's family was waiting for her as well. Stories like Fasha's reinforce why I study gorillas. They can teach us so much about ourselves, filling in the evolutionary gaps of what we share with our ape relatives and what makes us uniquely human. We can learn so much from them while we are learning about them. And I think one of the most important lessons that we can learn from gorillas right now is how we too can recover from tremendous loss. Our society has suffered so much in recent years. The pandemic brought about literal isolation, but technology, political divisions, families spread far apart, all of this goes to challenge our connectedness, as was recently pointed out by the Surgeon General, who declared the United States to be in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. Gorillas remind us the importance of returning to our anthropological roots and of the value of building enduring relationships. They reinforce what studies and my own family experiences have shown, that creating strong and connected communities are the key to our resilience. What other lessons can we learn from gorillas? Taking time to stop and smell the flowers, for one. But what more can they teach us about the deep evolutionary roots of our own sociality and how critical these roots are to our well-being and health as a species? And perhaps just as importantly, will we have the time to learn these lessons? Of the 1 million species on our planet that are threatened with extinction, gorillas are among the most at risk. Fasha, Titus, and their families hold wisdom that we still have to gain, wisdom that can help both them and us.